what I look at it like is they're trying to kind of create an example and see how far they can go with like going after people for their speech. And what you said before, as far as like this is just the beginning of, you know, mass censorship on American citizens, I've been arguing that for months because like a lot of these right-wingers are like, yeah, get them out of here. They're Muslim terrorists, blah, blah. And I'm like, bro, you guys don't see what's going on here.
Did somebody say Patriot Act 2.0? This seems to be the general vibe many people are getting about this recent kind of tear when it comes to deportations. As Ian Carroll and Myron Gaines in this clip are actually going to discuss their fears for what they're seeing, which I believe both of them argue to the point that they believe massive censorship is coming to American citizens just based on the precedent we are seeing with college students being deported based on their political views, with evidence not being fully withstanding, maybe not fully present there. Now, they do both admit that they haven't looked deeply into the cases. Well, at least Ian Carroll admits that. Myron's looked into them a bit more. However, a lot of people get up in arms over this view. Now, I will be probably the last person who would ever defend an immigrant's ability to speak freely in our country. However, I do share some of their fears as it relates to it being turned and used on American citizens under the guise of terrorism. Here's the rest of the clip.
I mean, what are your thoughts on like Mahmoud Khalil or the girl up in Tufts that got grabbed by ICE? What are your thoughts on that, man? Grabbing them up for writing fucking op-eds and shit.
Dude, it's like, I mean, it's messy because it's all, there's like, you can make these individualized case arguments and you can kind of like, you can subvert the conversation by diverting it to this one that is like a justified like deportation or this one that's nice. And I have kind of intentionally not dug into the very specifics of each one. But in general, it's like we were promised fucking deportations of like mass amounts of illegal immigrants that were committing crimes in our country, that were crossing our southern border illegally, that were trafficking children, that were gang members. And like, we're getting less deportations than during Biden. And B, we weren't looking for fucking deportations of like college kids that are having opinions and like contributing to our country. And like, maybe you want those deportations too, but that's the fucking end of the list.
Yeah.
And so
They're
for
here
me, the way I
legally.
look at it is I don't even get lost in the minutia. It's just like, just the fact that that is the way they're taking the deportation angle makes it clear what they're really trying to do here. And it makes it clear that like, because it's the deportations based on speech and like technicalities and really about opposing Israel. But then it's also pair that with the speech laws, pair that with the like anti-boycott, anti-speech laws that are targeting the universities, and pair that with the like war with Iran fervor and the like, just, it is very clear that they are trying to just set up this whole thing where they can start labeling Americans terrorists. And that's been sort of like the slow roll goal ever since 9/11. But if they can convince the American public that it's okay to label American citizens domestic terrorists for their support of a terrorist group, it's fucking game over. Then literally anyone can be deported, anyone can be put in jail, anyone can be tried without a trial, like put away without a trial. It's just like the darkest possible outcome, and I don't think we're like headed there real quick, but it's like I don't even get lost in the minutia because it's all fucked. It's like even the ones that you could argue are an okay deportation, that's not the fucking point.
Yeah.
Like, why do we still have all these gang members? Why do we still have all millions and millions of people that cross the southern border that are unaccounted for, hundreds of thousands of children that are missing that we've not found, that are probably some of them dead. It's like that's the kind of shit that matters that I'm not hearing shit about. So I don't give a shit about people on college campuses. Like,
yeah, no, and I'll tell you too, bro. Like, someone that used to work for ICE, it takes an enormous amount of resources to track these students down, go pick them up, and arrest them. And they only have a finite amount of bed space and ICE officers that actually go and facilitate these deportations. So, to go after students that are here legally because of their political views is pretty fucking ridiculous. Now, for my political views, I'm very, I think we need an immigration moratorium. I'm very pro-immigration enforcement. But to waste those resources knowing, because I used to come from that world, how many guys we actually have that can actually conduct this properly is ridiculous. And the other thing, too, with the students that they deported, yes, they're liberals, yes, they're progressives, Mahmoud Khalil and this girl that wrote this op-ed. But here's the problem. The girl wrote an op-ed, and they went and arrested her, writing an article talking about boycotting Israel. That's not Hamas. And then the other guy out of Colombia that got grabbed, he was just a middleman that would talk to the school and then talk to the students. He was basically an intermediary that was trying to facilitate speech. He didn't necessarily support Hamas either. But what I look at it like is they're trying to kind of create an example and see how far they can go with like going after people for their speech. And what you said before, as far as like, this is just the beginning of, you know, mass censorship on American citizens. I've been arguing that for months because like a lot of these right wingers are like, yeah, get them out of here. They're Muslim terrorists, blah, blah. And I'm like, bro, you guys don't see what's going on here. They're experimenting on the green card holders and the visa holders and see what the public sentiment is. And if they could get away with removing them and or arresting them for this stuff with very little due process, guess who's fucking next, idiot? It's going to be American citizens. Yeah. Like the people don't understand that. Like they never, it's always an inch leads to a mile. But, so
I mean, like that's all happening while we have more than enough evidence to go after all kinds of perpetrators of sexual violence against Epstein victims. Like Alan Dershowitz is walking free. Leslie Wexner is walking free. Like these are American citizens that are living in multi-million-dollar homes in America that we have multiple sworn statements in court, tons and tons of evidence, and probably tapes from Epstein's own fucking apartments that show these crimes that we could at least be investigating. Like, and so it's like, yeah, we're going after fucking college kids that wrote some op-eds when we literally have sexual violence and like terrorism, like that kind of terrorism, like espionage. Yeah. Those homies are just like living rich. So it's like just the clear, the priorities are super fucked.
Let me just start by asking, do you agree? Do you believe that the priorities of this administration are effed, as Ian and Carroll put it? I am one to agree. Now, I don't know how harshly I agree and how strongly I should say I agree, but I do agree on most of the points that were made here. Now, I do think there are actually kind of 5 broad takeaways from what they had actually discussed in this clip alone. And I'm going to go ahead and break them down one by one from what I kind of took away from this video here. The first point, the deportation of legal students versus the lack of deportations of illegals. That seems to be the primary optic of this scenario here, as we are seeing in the news with Mahmoud Khalil and the journalist who wrote the op-ed all being thrown under the similar blanket of, well, you're doing this, you're anti-Israel, so that must mean, again, with the dichotomy, you must be pro-Hamas, therefore, we're now going to thrust you. You are now deemed a terrorist or a supporter of a terrorist organization. And that simply just doesn't match up with the mandate that we put forward with Trump. I mean, we put forward the mandate of mass deportations, not because we didn't like the way that they viewed things politically, but because the racial and demographic realignment of this country happening at the pace that it was for one, entirely unsustainable, but 2, economically devastating, and 3, I would argue, puts us on a trajectory for a very misaligned prioritization and hierarchy of values that I would argue are non-American. So that's the one that I agree with the most. The optics of this are miserable. And I think when you have an administration that starts with posting their deportation numbers and then quickly moves to not talking about them at all, it shows that they're doing the PR move of it's best to stay silent. Point number 2 is Patriot Act 2.0, which would be the fact that the fear is primarily parallel with what occurred, which is now infamous, which was the Patriot Act, which, if everyone remembers, was used against January 6 defendants, using a broad form umbrella of what terrorism is and being able to throw people under that, and also a way that kind of eliminates their constitutional rights. You don't need due process. You don't need any of these things when you're dealing with a terrorist. You know, we don't negotiate with terrorists. And I think that those fears do need to be recognized because the Patriot Act, when under the leadership of Democrats and the far left and these crazos, was used against American citizens. I mean, it's the same reason that they were building watch lists for parents who didn't want sexual education taught to their 4-year-olds or 5-year-olds or 6-year-olds. That one is the one that scares me the most. And I'll highlight that in a later point with number 4 as well, which I think when it comes to censorship, we already know America is clearly operating under censorship. You can't say a lot of things on YouTube. You can't say a lot of things on Twitch. Now, I will say there is definitely a difference between terms of service and what's deemed free speech when it comes to a private company. However, I think explicitly there does need to be a better ruling on TOS not being more prominent than what the First Amendment is. The First Amendment needs to reign supreme. TOS can bug with anything that falls underneath that. If someone's direct and constitutionally protected speech is not allowed on a private platform, I think you run into a problem, especially when you see how X and Facebook and all these other social media platforms operate as the public square. Point number 3 is a more finite point, but it is about the waste of resources, as Myron lays out for what ICE has to do in regards to limited bed space and the organization of the agents. And I think in particular, when you pair just the resources that are required and the scarcity of them with what we're seeing and what we saw with the first term with President Trump, which is the kicking and screaming and the fighting against anything that Trump and his administration tries to do, and you throw that on top of not putting your full force into the illegal deportations, and you're kind of playing around on these different spheres, like with the political censorship, I think it's clear that you're not going to get anything done. You need to go all hands on deck, because you know that the Democrats and the activists that fulfill these positions as if they were judges and otherwise, they're going to do whatever they can, whether it's legal or not, like we're seeing with these recent judges being arrested. They're going to pull out all the stops to make sure it doesn't get done, which is why I think dividing your attention to things that I would deem not a part of the mandate, like no one voted for Trump on the basis that he was going to deport legal college students because of how they felt about Israel. I think some reckoning does need to be done in terms of what the priorities are. Point number 4, like I said earlier, and I was going to come back to this with what I deem to be Patriot Act 2.0, or at least the feeling out of this censorship experiment, like Myron Gaines laid out, makes me think very, very similarly of what I feel what COVID was, with the mandates to end the lockdowns, which was basically a push, which turned into a long form shove that lasted way longer than it should have, but basically a push that was to get a feel for just how sheep-minded the average person was in America. Now, I could be wrong, and I'll put it on screen, but when I saw a post from Anomaly that said almost 82% of all Americans took one shot minimum or some form of the COVID-19 vaccine, I think the answer was very clear in front of me, that there are a vast majority of Americans who will just simply go along with things instead of being inconvenienced for what they might think, feel, or believe is the right thing to do. And I think much in that same light, this current deportation program happening on college campuses, and that being kind of a focus point, reminds me of the same way of they're testing the waters of just how much can we get away with that might be on these gray lines as it relates to the First Amendment. And like they had said in that clip too, I think that's when they'll get to a finite point, get more confident in being able to deport someone over their political views because they did it previously. And if they can get over those cries, the initial ones, it makes it easier to do it way down the line when they've been doing it for some time. Which is to say, the second step would be, like they had lined out, when they move from foreigners here on legal visas to a native-born American who might say something or do something on campus that's similar, which I think is muddying the waters very much, and is very much very possible, because there's many foreigners who may be doing these things, and at these celebrations and these get-togethers, riots, sit-ins, whatever you want to call them, there are native-born people there too who are organizing and protesting as well, and they probably share very similar tenets and beliefs as the ones who are foreigners, which I think opens it up for very, very scary ground, and one that I really hope we do not see. In point number 5, being probably the most recent and most prominent one that I would highlight, which would be the lack of what's the happenings of arrest everywhere else, which is, I think, puts a cherry on top of this. The optics are messed up. The optics are awful, for one, but the priorities are entirely, they're off. Something's wrong here. And when you look at what happened recently with Virginia Jeffrey, forgive me if I'm saying it wrong, but an alleged Epstein victim now being Epsteined shortly after she was hit by a bus, of all things, we're in the territory of, once it's getting to be so long and we're not seeing anything happen, and it was kind of teased to us with these, phase 1 Jeffrey Epstein binders with a bunch of these ridiculous influencers jumping around, parading around, even though it was already publicly released information. And you just see the lack of conviction, the lack of will to get things done. You cannot be surprised when people start asking questions, especially when it looks like your lack of will or your lack of urgency to expedite these things that the American people mandated to you are resulting in the continuation of people being missing personed, if you will. It's not going to bode well, especially when you look at a shorter time frame from a 2-year period while we are before the midterms, when we have a solid idea of the kind of majority that what we have, and we won everything as Republicans. Now is the time we need to get things done. Now is the time we got to hold people's feet to the fire. But more so in particular, I think with the Epstein stuff, I think that bothers me in particular very deeply, but most everybody, because it's becoming common knowledge that there is some apparatus that operates, behaves, and moves inside and with or above the American government that is a cabal of individuals who are operating a pedo network. At the end of the day, when I look at having to pay taxes and live in a government, and I believe that I'm being ruled by these people, it does not bode well for the trust of the system. And I think that in told is enough for everyone to raise their eyebrows and go, hey, wait a minute, something's not adding up here. Now, with all the points there stated, I think the broad takeaway here is that you want to not fall into the cult of personality. You want to not fall in the camp of my guys versus their guys. I am too old to believe the words that come out of politicians' mouth. I have been lied to too many times. I will never take what a politician says as a confirmation that it will be getting done. More often than not, you operate with that belief. You will be disappointed, believe me. You got to go by what their actions are. And when you have so many day one promises and so little deliveries, you can't blame people for asking questions. And I think that's where I'll end it there. Thank you for making it this far. I appreciate it if you did. Definitely leave a like and share the show if you enjoyed it. And as always, if you want more of this content, me and my co-host, Worrell, who also runs the America First TV channel, which is much bigger than mine, we do a podcast together called the Jar Openers Podcast, and that is Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you want to see some more long-form content, a bit more mainstream twist to it compared to what I do here on my personal channel, definitely check us out. I would appreciate it, and we both would appreciate it very much. But I would also like to, again, state at the end too, please let me know what your thoughts are with this. Do you think that these are too overbearing of concerns? Do you think it's too soon to be having these concerns? Do you think we need to give the administration more time? What are your thoughts? What is your pushback to what you heard in this clip here? And with that, thank you very much, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.